Hi, you're listening and watching The Leadership Enigma. Well, we have over 200 episodes now on our YouTube channel. And even tonight, we're doing another live episode in front of an exclusive audience of about 100 people. But more about today. Today is all about continuing to explore the human being over the human doing. It's about continuing to explore that link between elite sport and leadership. So trust me, you don't want to miss this particular episode because I have the wonderful Bob Skinstad with me in the studio. Now, this is a gentleman who captained the under-21 Springbok side in 1996 and 1997. Debuted for the men's team in 1997 against England, of all others. 42 tests for the Springboks, 11 tries, and captained the national side to its second Rugby Union World Cup in 2007. How does this relate to human-centered leadership? We'll find out. Come back to me just after the break. Hi, I'm Adam Pacifico, and welcome to The Leadership Enigma, a world-ranked, award-winning podcast that's insatiably curious as regards what leaders do, how they do it, and importantly, why. We'll delve into the human doing, but even deeper into the human being and the power of human-centered leadership to drive sustainable change. So whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts and disruptors, as together we will discover that success leaves clues. Bob, it's a warm welcome to the Leadership Enigma. How are you?
I'm very good, Adam. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for coming into the studio. I always ask the question, you've done many of these, how's the studio for you?
It's very impressive. I've got to say it was surprisingly grand. I was walking up the Broadway, I think it's called.
Yes.
House, trying to find it. A very, very sort of hidden away door, and then to come into this area. Very impressive.
It's a little secret oasis of
It is.
podcasting. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. There is so much to talk about, and I want to kind of start with the early years for you, because obviously we'll get to you playing for the Springboks. But obviously, tell me a little bit about growing up in South Africa, those early years, and you kind of take me to what is most memorable for you.
Thank you. I will. So South Africa is a fantastic country. It's a very young democracy. It's a complex country, and we can dive into that. But growing up in South Africa as a I'm not going to pull any punches. As a white privileged person was unbelievable. The best weather in the world, the most freedom of movement, the most outdoor lifestyle, the most amazing countryside, the most amazing places to see. So I was incredibly privileged. I was born in Zimbabwe.
Right.
My dad was active in the military, and he was a doctor, but he was a medical field doctor.
Right.
So post-war, basically he was allowed to load up the old Peugeot 504 with family members.
Well, that's taking me back already.
Yeah, exactly. And a couple of $100, and then sent to the border, and good luck. So we arrived in South Africa. I think I'd already turned 4.
I was going to say, how old?
And my dad got a job as he was a pediatric oncologist at the Red Cross Hospital in Cape Town,
Right.
originally, which he did for a number of years, and then went back into general practice later on. So, I had a dad who was a doctor and usually would do sort of weekend and weekday night stints at a school so that he could afford to send us to schools that were, slightly better quality. And I was very lucky to have gone to private schools all the way through my childhood, Highbury in Durban and Hilton College. So I really can't complain. I mean, I had life handed to me on a plate. I was incredibly lucky.
You talk about that privilege element and coming across, I think you said at 4 years old. At what age did you start to realise about some of the challenges that were surrounding you, but perhaps you were a little bit shielded from them? About what age?
Yeah, look, I think teenage years, I mean, I'm not going to, like I said, I'm not going to pull punches because it's becoming more and more of an influence in who I'm trying to be.
Right.
Looking back and seeing whether, was I right, was I wrong to understand or not understand the difference between people, etc. And I'm seeing a lot of it play out in different political wars around the world right now. So we were Rhodesian, and Ian Smith had a very storied management, let's say, of the difference between the privileged and the less privileged.
Yes.
However, he created an incredible education system, an incredible sort of infrastructure around looking after people. But quite clearly, even then, he didn't see everybody as some people more equal than others. Was quoted around that time. But what he did was look after everybody. So I don't think we ever felt that South Africa was separate. I never looked down on people for, I just wasn't in that world.
Yes.
And then as a teenager coming through school, there were a lot of people who were very, very anti what was still the nationalist or apartheid government. My dad included. He was a very vociferous political voice. He used his status as the sort of village doctor to be quite outspoken about a lot of it, and was very much in a political party that was the opposition.
Right.
And took various forms. I think it was Progressive Freedom Party and a few other things, and then eventually became the Democratic Alliance, which is currently part of the politics in South
What
Africa.
impact did that have on you, seeing and listening to your dad as an ambassador for?
Yeah, so that, I think mainly it was enlightening.
Yes.
It allowed me to understand that there were a lot of misdemeanors gone sort of unrighted,
Yes.
And there were a lot of wrongs gone unchecked type thing. And then in my teenage years, there was a growing voice for the release of Nelson Mandela and political prisoners. So I was right in the middle of that.
Someone you met.
Of course. Later on in my career, I was so lucky to meet the man. But in 1990, the growing voice, I was 12, 13.
Right.
So I wasn't an 18-year-old activist.
Now,
who
these
was
are still
going,
your formative years.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So I'm sort of working out things about the world. And also being part of South Africa at that time, I think has been interesting for a lot of people. They are South Africans, expats, all around the world in middle and senior management.
Yes.
Who were influenced by that short period of time. The wronging of rights, the righting of wrongs, and a whole bunch of other things associated with it. I think it was an amazing time for South Africans, but I think a lot of people saw it as the end, and a lot of people saw it as the beginning, and I think it was actually the sort of conflagration of the two.
So hindsight's a wonderful thing, and we always, don't we, in life?
2020 vision hindsight.
Well, exactly, right? We always sometimes think, I wish I knew then what I know now. So what are, as an expat, now you're living and working in London, what are some of your reflections now based on some of the experiences then? Because sometimes the passage of time allows us to connect the dots a little differently. So where are you now in those reflections?
Well, it's such an interesting question, because I think for me, there are definitely two parts to my life. The one is just the living of life.
Yes.
What would I have done differently? And I do feel I got handed a lot on a plate. I probably could have applied myself a lot more in both education and in sport even.
Says the World Cup.
Well, I can expand on that. I genuinely think that.
Yeah. Why do you say that?
Because I was blessed with natural talent, and I was in an environment where that was rewarded very quickly.
Yes.
Which meant that the level of work that I had to display as a youngster, and I can get onto how I know the difference, because I had two different parts to my career. The second half of my career, I'd got older, slower, heavier,
wiser.
Well, yeah, exactly. Shortcut seeking, but I definitely worked harder at that stage. So I could turn it on, but I hadn't turned it on because I hadn't been challenged to turn it on.
Okay.
So I now look back and I go that there were two different parts. I don't think I certainly didn't run away from work. I probably just didn't have a mentality for vicious winning. And then I reflected and I said, but that's okay, because actually I'm probably a nicer person than someone who only did that. So, and I've made more friends through my sport. I have a lot of good relationships with people in other countries that I battled against. Right. And I'm proud of that. I can go to Australia and see the ex-captain of Australia and stay at his house and be invited there and be invited for dinner and stay as long as I want. It's not like it's not a state visit. It's a friend visit. And I'm very proud of that.
So how does it feel as an expat living in London now, looking at South Africa today?
Yeah.
Are you seeing progress? Are you seeing change, challenge? or do you feel as if you are still very much on the periphery just by reason of geography?
No, I think I've been in London 10 years now.
Right.
I've
Family are all here.
Yeah, family have been here. They as they grow up and are spending more time. My wife is visiting her mum and my mum, who are Cape Town based. And I think you say, how do I feel now?
Yeah.
I think I'm feeling more positive about South Africa.
Okay.
And I'm also feeling that I should have known that South Africa would be a very young democracy for quite a long time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Be in its formative years. Because, overnight success in world politics or in writing of difficult situations doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
Overnight success in that world takes 20 years. And we've had 20 odd years and more. I think we've 32 as a democracy. I mean, think about that in the history of the world, of empire.
You've probably got sports injuries older than that.
You laugh, exactly. I'd certainly do. And I think to be at that stage of our growth or our journey, and to have demonstrated so much learning and so much healing is an amazing place to be. And I think a lot of very positive South African leaders and business people around the world need to be recognized for that, because they've done a lot with very little.
Yes.
And they've done it with very little consideration for their end game. They've done it for the betterment of the country. And I think that's to be applauded. I think it's amazing.
I've been lucky enough to go to South Africa on multiple occasions, and also to East Africa. So I'm a huge fan. Recently to Nairobi in Kenya a number of times, and also Rwanda.
Okay.
So I consider that quite a privilege to go there. But what's been the impact of South Africa to some of those other African countries? Is everyone looking at South Africa in some ways for a guidance, or what happens there first may happen elsewhere? What's been your experience in that respect?
Again, a good question, because I think there's a lot of outsiders looking in, but there's also insiders looking out.
Sure.
A lot of businesses in South Africa were set up in a way that they could trade internationally without having to go into Africa.
Right.
But I think a lot more businesses now are expanding into Africa, particularly the telcos, infrastructure-based businesses, property REITs moving into malls and growing sort of the footprint that they have into Africa. And franchising, Africa is, I suppose, still the great undiscovered, the breadbasket of the world if it's treated correctly.
Yeah.
And certainly in a short number of years will be the biggest growing youthful population in the world.
Yeah.
So I think there are countries looking in at South Africa. I mean, probably the most famous is Zimbabwe. I mean, our direct neighbor. I was born in what's modern day Zimbabwe, and it's been very different. However, you get a lot of traveling Zimbabweans who see South Africa as a positive sort of result compared to a difficult, struggling on infrastructure,
Right.
Run by a dictatorial president for a number of years, and they say, well, we could have been a lot closer, a lot better, but at the same time, they're probably also a young democracy, So Africa's not fixed. But Africa's not broken.
Right.
And I think that's, I as a younger man, I was probably waiting for it to be fixed, and what I'm now reaching the stage of is that I'm very, very happy it's not broken.
Right. You mentioned Nelson Mandela. So I have to ask, because I know that you've described that meeting as probably the most valuable hour that you've spent. So just not many guests are going to sit where you're sat and tell me that they had an opportunity to meet Nelson Mandela. He was a bastion of freedom and diversity and inclusivity, and perhaps in a world that is heavily polarized, someone who is now greatly missed. Just tell me, what was it like to actually meet Mandela himself?
Well, it was unbelievable. I mean, the thing you missed out, he was also a massive rugby fan.
Oh, to be fair, you're right. We haven't even got to the rugby part yet.
No, exactly. And so what he would do in his short tenure, and we all wish it could have been a lifetime of leadership from him. We would have learned a lot more. But in his short tenure, he would have a yearly meeting with the captain of the national teams.
Right.
A pat on the back, good luck, how we doing, etc. And anyone who's watched that amazing movie Invictus,
Yeah. Proud wearer of the national shirt.
yeah, exactly, can see how much he did to not allow the country and the new leaders in the country to use the national pride around the Springboks team as a stick.
Yeah.
He used it actually as a carrot, as a motivation for people. And 1995, much like what's happening with the team right now. I mean, rugby, South Africa screeches to a standstill for the 80 minutes that the national team play.
I can imagine.
It is extraordinary. I was at the last 2 test matches between New Zealand and South Africa. South Africa won both for the first time in a long time.
Yes.
In front of absolutely sort of 105% capacity stadiums. And I know that because there were people slipping in and jumping over
Peering
stalls.
over whatever fence.
Exactly. And jam-packed and full and declaring national pride of the highest order, but a fully multiracial, multifaceted crowd.
Right.
Black, white, man, woman, child, grandfather, grandmother, etc. The whole gambit. And for me, I just get goosebumps even talking about it, because that is the South Africa watching sport that he was thinking about when everybody else was trying to divide the spoils.
Right.
And that's probably the single biggest thing that I reflect on about that time. Because I asked him a very direct question. I said, what do you do when you've been told that you're leaving prison? You've been in there for 27 years, and you're going into a position of power. He says, well, we did debate for a long time what we are going to do, because we believed we would get into a position of power. And he said, and some people said, let's kill them all. And some people said, let's keep them all. And somewhere in the middle is where we ended. And I just thought to myself, imagine being the I don't know what you'd be, holding the debate together and stopping the people who are saying, well, I want to punish the people who punished me.
Vengeance is a strong emotion.
Of course it is. And then also stopping the people who say, well, let's just integrate. You actually need to say, well, hold on, let's put parameters together. And that's the leadership. That's the sort of the natural ability to just rise above everybody else, which he displayed from moment one.
Extraordinary after 27 years of incarceration as well, to still have that level of hope.
Yep.
And, as you say, an ability to be an arbiter between quite, again, polarized factions. How did he leave you feeling, though, when you met him?
Well, actually, he's I say this with the greatest and deepest respect, but he's a bit of a flirt. So he was chatting to my young fiance, who's now my wife, luckily, and he got her a glass of wine. He was chatting. I was like, well, hang on, when am I going to chat to the bloke? But
you were just the captain.
Yeah,
fine.
Exactly. No, he's just such a warm, gentle person that you left feeling better about yourself, and better that there were people like that in the world.
Wow.
Like, quite genuinely.
As I say, that's a question I'm probably not going to ask another guest, so I had to just ask that. I'm bookending in a certain way, because we talked about the early life and your memories of being in South Africa and coming across from Zimbabwe. I want to come to now, because you're a partner at Elixirr. Just help everybody understand what you do and what Elixirr does, because I've got some questions in relation to the leader that you are now.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'll be very quick. So Elixirr is a consultancy. I'd say non-traditional consultancy, a challenger consultancy.
Yep.
It's a partnership model, so participation. Founded by Stephen Newton, a South African, graduated out of University of Cape Town,
right.
And came over here basically like a lot of South Africans, possibly even the people I was talking about, who were that sort of age group, you know, between not quite born free as they're referred to in South Africa, which is post Mandela's release from prison.
Yes,
but certainly in and around that area.
Right.
And Stephen came over and worked at all the storied firms, IBM and KPMG and Accenture, I think was the last one, and then basically was railed against just putting a whole bunch of people into deployment of various software gigs in big businesses, and said, where's the strategy that we were talking about? Where's the strategy that we did all the work to learn how to talk to our clients about, and started Elixirr on his own. I think it's 14 years ago now.
Right.
The firm listed 4 years ago, so
Wow.
listed on AIM. And anyone who wants to see what Elixirr does would probably look at a traditional consultancy and then say, okay, it's a smaller version of those
Yes.
with an out and out sort of want to hire the quality people who leave the bigger firms because they're not actually doing the strategic work,
Right.
and then put customers first and work with them. We've been highly acquisitive since the listing.
Right.
So if we were strategically telling people that they needed to up their digital environment for their business, we bought a digital agency.
Right.
We've bought a data and analytics business. We've bought a leadership consultancy. So what we
So
do is
fast growth. By
Exactly.
acquisition.
So the acquisition has allowed us to basically buy and grow the pieces of the puzzle to make the picture whole.
Okay. And what is the role that you have? So, Springbok captain into Elixirr. Like, I know you've been an entrepreneur as well. You started some businesses. I think you did a joint venture with Saatchi and Saatchi. So there's an entrepreneur inside you as well. So what's the role that you have within Elixirr for clients?
So I'm a partner at Elixirr.
Yep.
I'm probably the closest thing is sort of CMO. We don't hold all the traditional titles. I'm partner responsible for the marketing team. So I work with our global head of marketing, and then I've actually got clients myself. So I've got a book of people that I look after.
Yeah.
I worked in private equity and venture capital for a family office for a number of years, and then actually in COVID, the portfolio management role that I had, the chairman got quite ill and moved out to Cornwall. So I said, okay, well, we had a sunset clause with one of our funds, and I said, okay, at the end of that, I'll probably want to look around. And in the interim, I'd met Stephen and the team from Elixirr.
So who is the leader? Well, who are you as a leader now? And when I nearly said Bob, you said Bobby earlier as well, didn't you?
Yeah, Bobby. As long as it's not Robert, then I'm in trouble.
No, that's probably just only for your mother to say that, right?
Exactly.
Who's the leader that you are now in the work that you do, both leading internally, I know you've got one of your team here now, or whether it's the external facing Bob as well? How would you describe the leader that you are now?
So I think without being too cheesy about it, I definitely have learned that the older I get, the more I've got to learn. So learner as opposed to leader.
Yep.
I do think people throw a position on you. I'm tall. I've spoken on television. I've spoken in front of crowds. Oh, that's okay. You're a leader. Those don't qualify you to be a leader. You've got to be a leader first, and then learn how to present yourself as a leader. And I'm still learning how to be a leader. I think in the corporate world, I suffer from imposter syndrome and a whole bunch of things like everybody does.
Welcome to being human, right?
Yeah, well, exactly. But a lot of people will turn around and say, oh, but you chased people around and tackled them, and you must be big and strong. So how would you be imposter syndrome? And I say, well, that's a very different part of your brain,
Yeah.
So I think the leader that I'd like to be is the learner.
Yes.
I'm very privileged to be on a journey with a bunch of people who are very ambitious and aspirational, because that definitely allows me to leap out of bed in the morning. If I was in a
that's your purpose.
Well,
isn't it?
exactly. It creates a purpose and the vision drives the purpose for the people that I work with. And I'm also learning every day. We've got a huge focus on getting better at consultancy in the sports world. We've looked at a lot of what's happening in the sports world. There are some very traditional and very good consultancies in that space. We're not necessarily aiming there. We've got a slightly grander plan than that, and part of my role is to dig into what that means and I harness things like the NIL in name, image, likeness, which has recently happened in the US. Private equity moving into sport, portfolio management in that space, which is something we do traditionally. So we work with the big private equity firms anyway. What we're trying to do is build out a bit more knowledge in our space, and then move into an area where we think sports as a vertical is an area we should aim at in the future.
So I can see some of the clues there in relation to how the dots have been connected.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether anyone's going to be surprised. We haven't actually even spoken about rugby yet, but that's the essence of actually, I want to understand the human being beyond the human doing, because we'll come on to that. We'll come on to now. In some ways, that's the jam and the sandwich, isn't it? We dealt with the bookends very, very briefly. How on earth did you get into rugby?
Well, in South Africa, you can't not get into rugby.
It was destiny.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I went to, like I said, traditional private schools, smaller schools.
Yep.
We had very good level of coaching, etc. But we had to be competitive through, I suppose, that good coaching and preparation, because we were always probably a third of the size of the schools that we were playing against. And you just grow the love of the game. My dad played to a reasonable level.
Okay.
I mean, some of my early memories were running onto he got knocked out playing in a village game, and
Right.
I was running on to see what had happened.
And that didn't put you off.
Well, I didn't know. I thought he was just having a sleep, but he was fine, and because he was the village doctor, he probably had to tell himself, okay, you got to jump off the field at the moment. But I just grew up with rugby being around us.
Right.
The sad part was I didn't grow up with the Springboks being a part of it, because they were in apartheid.
Right.
So 1986, there was a rebel tour from New Zealand, the Cavaliers,
Yes.
to South Africa, which was the first international sport that had happened since the early 70s.
So how old were you when you were first introduced then to that
Well, we
international-
played the game at school, but watching an international on
Yeah.
television, I mean, we listened in 81. We had a rebel tour to New Zealand,
Right.
led by Werner Klaassen as the captain at that stage.
Uh-huh.
And I think I remember bits of listening to that on the radio, but I was 5 or 6 years old. So it would have been my dad and his friends listening to it.
Yeah.
And then 86, I do remember going to one of the matches. So dad had probably taken a few friends and kids and that kind of thing. But I was only 10 years old then.
So at what point did you realise, or did someone realise, that you could go all the way, that you could end up playing international rugby at the highest level?
Well, that's it. That's the interesting thing is and I do talk about this, or I do think about this as part of some of the learning for me, is that when I played rugby, it wasn't a vocation.
Right.
So it became a vocation in the year that I captained the South African under-19 and then under-21 team.
Okay.
So pre-1995,
Right.
rugby wasn't professional.
Okay.
So 1995, all the players then...
So it
got
wasn't an
together.
option.
It wasn't an option.
Right.
So I would have had to have had a job, and I could have played, and let's be honest, there was club rugby going on where you would get an envelope for your endeavours type
Right.
thing, thank you very much. But that sort of amateurism has been happening all over the world, and rugby was in that phase. You couldn't, every rugby player had a real job.
Right.
They were an estate agent or a butcher, or some of the guys actually went through university and studied and were accountants or lawyers or whatever it is.
We saw that in the England team as well, didn't we?
Oh,
Many of
absolutely,
them were.
of course, and famously so. The guys who changed the world, so to speak, for South Africa were the captains of the various countries who got together in the '95 World Cup and said, okay, well, hang on, every union is making an absolute mint here. All the other sports are professional.
Yes.
Are we going to do something? And they rebelled against what was sort of a loosely put together World Rugby Board.
Right.
And I think it was, I can't remember it was either Murdoch or one of the guys who'd done the pay television stuff in Australia, who said, okay, I'll fund it if you can get them away. I'll do a World Rugby League for you. And I think they used that as the sort of negotiating tool.
That was the catalyst,
That was the catalyst. And then World Rugby came back to the party, declared everything to be professional. But the interesting thing about the development of rugby is that it didn't mean anything, because the players got paid and the administrators and coaches and their assistants and groups got paid, but they hadn't changed the nature of what they did. So you could have a team manager who was a volunteer and loved the game anyway, and now suddenly you gave him money, and it made it really hard to
Right.
infuse excellence, because now you had to fire the people who were the backbone of the sport that had literally changed overnight. So
Right.
so I see and say often that rugby had that hamstring, or was hamstrung by that for 20 to 25 years.
So you lived through this transformational change of rugby within the nation.
Yeah, literally my entire career was the first 10 years of professionalism, or the first 13 years of professionalism.
Right, so you were almost the first group to...
Absolutely. I was the first contracted professional rugby player in South Africa.
Oh, well, there you go. I didn't know that.
Because I was
either.
the captain of the under-21 side, and they said, oh, hold on, we've just negotiated with those guys. who's next? And then they quickly went and phoned us all up and said, right, we're going to pay you now to play rugby. It wasn't a difficult negotiation for them because we were playing rugby anyway.
So you made your first team or your men's team debut in 1997 against England. What did that feel different in 97 now? To when, as you described in 1995, it was a shabata.
Yeah, I mean, overnight it became more important. I still talk about it was heady times. I mean, suddenly you're staying in amazing hotels and you're traveling all over the world and you're playing test matches. You're doing a whole bunch of things that you wouldn't have been doing if the game hadn't gone that way. Remember when we started?
Yeah.
South Africa weren't touring internationally. Some of the other teams were, and the Six Nations, 5 nations at that stage was going on.
Right.
So they were touring, but we weren't.
Okay.
We weren't going overseas and playing people. So there was no one to say, "Oh, this is what it's like when you go to England." Type
Right.
thing. And we were an early group of players who started doing that.
Right. So 42 tests, 11 tries. We talked about you captaining the national side for the Rugby Union World Cup in 2007. So incredible accolades. But what I want to do is make some links between that experience and leadership, because I know that is something that you're also passionate about as well. When you took the label of captain, I know you did that for the under-21s initially and then for the senior team. How did that feel? And I asked Stevie Ward this as well, because Stevie was sat exactly where you were sat, who was the former captain of the Leeds Rhinos, who's now retired after a couple of concussion injuries, and he talked very openly about that. And he talked very openly about the weight of being given the captaincy role. What was it like for you when they said, Bob, you're captain?
Yeah, talk about the weight. I think, so I'll break the answer up for you. In my career, I had 2 very distinct, different careers. One was I was the young, flamboyant, devil may care attitude kind of player who
be young.
Well, exactly. Exuberance of youth, if you want.
Yeah.
And the players and the fans, etc., flocked to me. And I was very lucky, and we had incredible success early on with my domestic team, and then that catapulted me into the national team.
Right.
And then I very quickly fell out of love with this role of always being responsible for everybody else's performance and everybody else's. And, you're 24, and suddenly you think your underpants are lined with gold, and everything just goes right for you.
And then reality kicks in.
Reality kicks in. In my case, I had a car accident, and I was then out for at least 4 months or 5 months.
That's a significant injury.
Of course. I had a posterior cruciate injury, which I came back and captained the national side for the first time after. So I recovered from it. But at the time, it really made me think about, what did I want this for?
Yes.
And I ended up going into a leadership role at the national side after having been through quite a difficult time. So South Africa, despite the Rainbow Nation sort of allegorical, we're all coming together and we all care about each other, still had language divides, background divide. English speaking, Afrikaans speaking in South Africa were just as big as a black-white.
Right. So there were other ways of
breakdown.
polarizing groups of people.
Absolutely. So I was
Which as human beings, we seem very good at the ability just to separate
it seems to be all we do.
I know.
Which I don't think is our greatest... Yeah.
No, I agree with you. That's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, of course it is. But anyway, and I'll tell you a story. So the thing that really sort of straw that broke the camel's back, I wasn't enjoying it.
Yeah.
And I happened upon a forwards meeting.
Right.
In a team that I was playing and starting in my own position in. So I walked into, by mistake, a meeting of the players.
Yep.
Which I hadn't been invited to. And I wasn't captain at that stage, but I was the only English speaking guy in the forwards pack.
Right.
And I mean, if I could say it with and like, there's no blame for me now, because we were all, I was brought up to be more English than Afrikaans, and Afrikaans guys were.
How old are you at this point of it?
21.
Oh,
young, and the story that I use sometimes when I'm speaking is to talk about the time.
Yeah.
And I remember a lot of these people I've made friends with. I had careers of playing rugby with, but at the time we were learning about each other. We were also very spiky about you're in a team, you're trying to play in your position. Rugby's a little bit more opaque, as you could play 6, 7 or 8, or you could play in the reserve. It's not, not like you're only an opening bat or an opening bowler.
Right, okay.
So you might actually be able to...
You can transition more.
You can, but you might be able to... You might piss off more than one other person.
I hear you.
If you know what I mean.
Stay in your lane, Bob. Stay in your lane.
Exactly. And we were sitting had a captain's practice at Twickenham.
Yep.
And this is, what informs leadership, and how do you look back at the things that influence you. And one of the other players... We've got a circle, and Twickenham's such a magnificent, Allianz Stadium, sorry, as it's been recently renamed. But it's such a magnificent cathedral of sport.
Yes.
So you have this, and a great surface, well looked after. It really, so on a Friday night, there's no one in there. The lights are on, and you go through your captain's run, as they call it, and then you finish up probably 20 minutes of running or so. You don't want to get too tired, but you go through a couple of the things, and then you get together as a team. You drink in the atmosphere.
Yeah, acclimatized.
Exactly. And then, the skipper might say something, or one or two of the players will say, okay, well, and don't forget, here's a point. Very normal for most sports. And one of the guys said, and don't forget that their grandparents fed our grandparents broken glass in the concentration camps. And my mum's from County Louth in Ireland. My dad's parents and grandparents are from Norway.
Right.
That was not my history. I knew the history, but I didn't carry that history, as in, but even if I had, I would have been seen as one of the people feeding the glass, not receiving.
What
the
do you
glass.
do then where that's verbalized
exactly.
as a
but I don't think
motivation in some ways?
Well, exactly. So I've looked back at it many times, and it was not aimed at me. It was let me say something to motivate everybody.
It was heartfelt from their perspective, their lived experience.
100%.
Right.
Just like anyone who's been through something, let's use what happened in the past to motivate us to go into a future. And I remember feeling the most isolated I'd ever felt.
Wow.
And I actually had a mini version of a panic attack. I had a twisted colon, which is a stress-induced, really painful stomach ailment. I still played the match. The next day, but I was my dad, like I said, is a doctor, so he came to see me at the hotel. Gave me the option. He thought he knew what it was. He couldn't understand. He knew a bit of the stress stuff, but you don't. You're trying to keep it all to yourself, like a big strong man.
Yeah,
I'll be fine. We are taught not to do.
I'll be fine. Limp.
So I think that probably informs the fact that it was a rocky learning, and that's why I see it as a learning, not a leading process. Until later in my career, I then said, well, bugger this, jumped out of professional rugby, worked. I'd gone to Saatchi and Saatchi. I'd come over here and loved it. I played amateur rugby at Richmond and the Barbarians, and then I still had the itch, and it needed scratching. And I went back into rugby for a year and a half. And the second time, it was the most blissful enjoyment.
Who were you playing for at that point?
So I went back and played for the Sharks.
Yep.
A franchise in Durban where I'd gone to school. And then at the end of that year, made the national team again, and then went to the Rugby World Cup in 2007. And I could have been...
What had shifted in you, Bob?
Well, I still think about it. I think it was... you're older, you've seen more of the world.
Yep.
I'd married and had kids by that stage, so I was more probably comfortable with myself, perspective changes, etc. But I was just so happy. You know what I mean? I was back in playing rugby like the 19-year-old again. So I sort of thought, I'll never have this again. Then the coaches were incredible to me, allowed me to get back into the environment. And the second time, I promise you, I would have carried bags. I would have, well, I did actually. I mean, I was more a sort of, I was a midweek captain of a team when we played Tonga, and I captain side against America. I was on the bench for the main team, but I enjoyed myself more than any other matches that I'd started because I was just living every moment. So there's definitely something to be said for, we lump these young sportsmen with all of the burden and
and talent.
Well, exactly.
Raw talent.
Well, exactly. But you mentioned how it becomes a burden and something to carry. I think the talent you've got anyway, the burden becomes when other people expect you to use your talent for their game or their team. And that becomes a big weight. So I think we should tell young sports people, that will come, and you will feel it and be ready for it, because nobody warned me. No one says, oh, you're going to feel old and gruesome at some stage, and you're going to hate getting out of bed in the morning.
The human race.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in fact, I think I talked about the weight of expectation when Stuart Pearce was sat in the very chair that you're sat in, and he talked about missing a penalty in front of 1 billion people, and then how do you overcome that? So I'm also interested how, you feel in relation to bouncing back, because there will be times where the team is just not playing well. It's just not clicking. But also you had a significant injury that you spoke about, but you still came back. So what are your thoughts in relation to that resilience, that ability to bounce back from adversity, which is inevitable for anyone in any walk of life?
Yeah, I think so. I worked very closely with a guy called Owen Eastwood, who wrote a book called Belonging.
Right.
And he talks about it being a principal need of humanity.
Yeah.
In the sort of anthropology of how we show up.
Yeah.
As individuals, we all have needs, and one of the needs is to belong to something. And I think sport is fantastic like that, because it creates a team environment. If you can perform alongside, it doesn't matter if you're playing five-a-side football on a Tuesday night.
It's hard to replicate outside of sport, isn't it?
It is, and that's what I'm saying is, so sport has that natural ability to do that for you. I mean, you can be in a two-man squash doubles team, and you feel a sense of something. You could be running a 5K with your mates a couple of times a week, and you fulfill what is probably very tribal.
Yes,
and it's a need that we've all had, and I think the translation of that is what's important. It's hard.
Yeah.
And you have to work at it every day. I mean, I'm very lucky at Elixirr. There's a lot of people who love sports, so we're looking at a big sports project. So I say, okay, I need some extra time. I need a BD squad. This is going to be on, maybe coffees before work or a beer after work, but that's when the work's going to be done. And people buy into it because they're part of something bigger.
Do you find yourself doing the things that you did on the rugby pitch now in a business context as regards pulling a team together, creating motivation or belonging? Do you find, it may not be quite the same, but do you find yourself relying on some of the skills and capabilities that you had on the rugby pitch now in a business environment?
So I'll turn that on its head for you.
Yep.
I do, but I find myself learning from the things that I did badly rather than the things that I did well. Because the natural things translate quite easily.
Okay.
Empathetic leadership is very easy in a corporate environment, but you have to work hard to pat someone on the back and say, well done for their work, or well done on their bit of a project. What I like doing is trying to remember areas of where I fail and make sure I'm not doing that now.
Yes.
So did I take on a project and not ask for help and then go mess it up and then get angry with the people around me? Yes, I did. In rugby. Okay. Sure, but make sure you're not doing that here.
Don't repeat the lessons of the past.
Where's my feedback loop? Who's talking to me about this, and how am I making sure that my role is helping that?
Yeah.
Because I don't think you can translate all the learnings across. I think some of them are just the character.
You'll draw from
exactly.
some
You draw from them,
you?
but I do think you can look at things that are a learning for what not to do, and definitely actually mark down how to notice them.
How did you lead for chaos? Because again, I had Stevie in the chair that you're sat in. We talked about this is a supercharged, gladiatorial, combat-esque environment where perhaps the best laid plan will not last as soon as 15 stone of people start colliding with each other. How do you lead when you're in that chaotic and constantly changing environment? Because that pretty much sounds like the world right now.
Yeah.
So how did you approach or try and get the team ready to be able to adapt in the second with this huge expectation of millions of people watching?
So again, and I'm not trying to deflect the questions. I'm actually trying to answer them in a way that's relevant for me. I don't think I did it that well.
Okay.
I was very good at talking to the referee, talking to the media, best laid plans, with the team. But then in the heady environment, I was quite an individual player. So I would do something a little bit different. I wouldn't always have all the right answers. The modern Springbok team, I think, are excellent at that. I think they've cracked that code.
Right.
I really think if you look at how they run their defensive lines, it is pretty much chaos theory. It's like sprint out of your line and smash whoever's got the ball, and then when the chaos ensues, do as much as you can to go forward, and then they sort of start to pattern in together. And I think it's amazing. And that leadership, I think, is very, very strong. I think and you're right about rugby, because it is chaotic and bodies. It's a bit like, wrestling mixed with cross country, mixed with steeplechase type things. And you've got to be. Well,
it is a combative environment, isn't it?
You have to be calm in those decisions. And that's why I say I'll deflect. I don't think I was very good at that. I was probably slightly better at strategy and preparation in the week before.
Right.
Plans going to order, etc., and preparing and fulfilling. I think that this modern team and the way they play the game is amazing in terms of the structured chaos that they create. They unpick defenses through attacking from different areas, then they unpick attack by defending from different areas. So it's extraordinary to watch.
I watched some of your tries actually last night on YouTube, and my body hurt just watching it. So there's obviously an emphasis on the physicality of rugby, but just help me understand the importance of the emotional side of it, or the EQ side of things for a match.
Well, here's a great line that I heard. So in rugby, speed is everything. So speed of execution. Right. So and I'm not talking about one fast one versus another fast one. I'm talking about the quicker I make a decision to tackle you at the right time, the better it is for me, because you're not prepared as I am.
Okay.
And what I think the team have done now, and I do this if I talk in public, I list the things that I think are better about this team that have now won back-to-back World Cups, and probably things we were working on but were maybe slightly underdeveloped,
yes.
and I think they've developed better. The more connected you are as people,
as a team,
yeah, and back to the anthropology point, the more connected you are. So if you and I are walking down Broadway, I've got teenage daughters, I will walk on the bus side because one of my teenage daughters is very ditzy and she'll be chatting to me, and a bus will be coming, and I'll be making sure she's away from that. The other one is straight line, and she'll be okay. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That connection that I've got between my daughter now saves her life every day. Not in any way that I think I'm a lifesaver, but I'm connected to her, so connected that I know it's going to happen an hour before we go for that walk. This team have got so much more connected off the field that they actually react faster to the needs of the people around them. It's extraordinary. And that speed is what's winning games.
So if you captain the World Cup winning Springbok team in 2007, could you put a finger, this may be an unfair question, on a critical ingredient for a high-performing team? Because everybody talks about, how do I be part and parcel or lead a high-performing team? Was there a standout ingredient for you?
Yeah, look, I mean, John Smith was the leader that stood out for me in that team, and with his experience and the number of over 100 tests, etc. He was very very in tune with the other players. He sort of was a man manager as well as a player, which was amazing. And you need those kind of characters,
right?
So I think that's close to the one thing is that, you need someone who understands the heartbeat. And I think that translates into most types of winning. It doesn't matter if it's a tennis champion and their physio coach, mom, dad, traveling party.
Yeah.
You've got a collective heartbeat as well as just your own heartbeat.
So that might not necessarily be the leader, but it might be
100%.
The networker or the person who's connecting in some other ways.
Absolutely. And I think the more you can create an environment for the development of more leaders in and around that, the better it becomes. I mean, I think collectively, the team can always make a decision to either play for themselves or the team.
Right.
You can do it in a job, you can do it in a family, you can decide to play golf on a Saturday morning instead of watching your kids. You can come up with an excuse that it's an important golf game, you can satisfy yourself. That's okay, but you know what the better decision is. Okay, and if you constantly take the better decision, the people around you see that. So you start creating an aura and
there's the role modeling
piece.
piece.
It's the role modeling piece.
And that which is infectious.
It is.
And I've always said IQ is not infectious, but that behaviour
EQ
or
is,
the patterns
yeah.
is infectious. Is there a standout lesson for you in all the experiences that you've had? It may not necessarily have come from rugby, because we talked about the early years as well. But is there something that's been a real standout lesson that's stayed with you and in some ways become part and parcel of your DNA?
There is, and I try not to be a cynical, negative person ever. There is a standout lesson.
Yep.
And for me, it's certainly not an overarching thing. It's just that there are different types of people. Someone told me once, they said, givers need to learn when to stop, because takers never do.
Right.
I wouldn't say that that's the lesson. The lesson for me is that there are different types of people. And find your tribe, because you will be more successful in a group of people. You will go, there's a saying around this. I'll probably get it wrong. It's, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Right.
And that, I think, is highlighting a little bit more of what I was saying, the culture and the belonging and being part of something. Just prepare yourself. I was a very open, wide-eyed, excited, enthusiastic, exuberance of youth, beaming guy. I'm not yet a sort of tired old cynic, but I can understand how people get there. And what I would say is to not go there. Educate yourself about the types of people around me, because otherwise you're going to go on journeys that are more difficult for you than other people.
Okay.
Go on the right journeys for you.
And we know, don't we, that culture and belonging can still have a huge amount of diversity.
Hugely so. Of course, it's anyone.
Which is the vehicle for it. Best piece of leadership advice ever given or received?
Sure. Wow. Okay, a throwaway one. I was a very young player in a team when a guy called Henry Honeyball, an amazing rugby player, an older guy, who ended up being my roommate. I was the youngest, he was the oldest type thing, and he was a farmer, so he was up at 4 a.m. I was a student, so I was trying to keep up with him, walking around cities. He was a great tourist, good guy. And we went into a restaurant in Edinburgh. We had a week off, and we went into a restaurant, and it was one of the guy's 30th birthdays.
Right.
And he'd had a few too much to drink, and he was dancing on the tables, and he wasn't making a nuisance of himself, but he was a very fun guy. Right. And Henry Honeyball was standing next to me, and I said, no, he needs to get down off there. He's embarrassing himself, and it's gonna cause chaos. And he said, no, just leave it. And I looked, and then the bouncers came over and pulled him down. I said, see, I told you. Yeah. And he said, it's not our job to tell him what to do. It's our job to be here when he gets in trouble for doing what he's done. And I've never, ever forgotten it.
There speaks the captain of the Springboks with it. Listen, I'm going to finish off by a bit of rapid fire either or questions for a bit of fun. So, right, here we go. Captain or player?
Player.
Okay. Rugby World Cup 1999 or 2007?
2007.
Okay. Is it the Stormers or the Sharks?
No, Stormers.
Okay. On-field strategy or off-field motivation?
Jeez, I wish I could say a collection of the two, but I think on-field strategy.
Okay. Lead by example or lead by instruction?
Example.
Gotcha. Be loved or feared? I asked you at Pierce that, actually.
Definitely loved.
Okay. Winning a match or earning your team's respect?
Team's respect.
Live forever or be remembered?
Be remembered.
Physical toughness or mental resilience?
Mental resilience.
And business leader or sports leader?
Oh, could you not put family leader?
You can
business leader in the long term.
Okay, no, I like the fact you've mentioned family as well, because that really is at the heart of everything. Listen, Bob, it's been great having you on.
Thank you.
I know we've scratched the surface of so many things, but I hope it's really whet people's appetite in relation to what you're doing now. So how can people get in touch with you and or at Elixirr to carry on the conversation or get you involved in their conversation?
Thank you very much. Adam, I've had a great time. I'm probably most easily contactable on LinkedIn.
Right.
Welcome to direct message me.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic community.
I'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's where I do most of the sort of public interaction.
Yep.
And then obviously elixirr.com is our website, and very happy to have, I think hello@elixirr.com is a very easy way to get hold of
And
me.
you'll find Bob somehow. Do that way. Final question. What are you looking forward to next?
Arsenal winning the Premier League.
Are you a Gooner?
I am a Gooner.
So am I.
Good
Welcome
man.
to
Good man.
this.
I knew there was something about you.
Well, obviously, there we go. Kindred spirits. Bob, thanks so much for coming to the studio. Appreciate it. And welcome to the amazing list of guests for the Leadership Enigma.
Thank you very much for having me.
Cheers. Join us again next week for more curiosity and insight with the Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.leadersenigma.com. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms and on our dedicated YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining the community.